Imagine a vast desert. The sun beats down, sand stretches as far as the eye can see. This is Egypt, but for one thing, a long winding river cuts through the land. This is the Nile. It is the lifeblood of Egypt. Without the Nile, there would be no Egypt, no pharaohs, no pyramids. The Nile River was the most important geographical feature in ancient Egypt. It provided everything the Egyptians needed to survive and thrive. The Nile gave them water to drink, food to eat, and a way to travel. It was their lifeline. The annual floods of the Nile deposited rich silt onto the land. This silt was fertile soil. It allowed the Egyptians to grow an abundance of crops. The Nile also provided a means of transportation. Boats could travel up and down the river. This connected people and goods across long distances. The Nile was not just a river, it was the heart of Egyptian civilization. It shaped their lives, their beliefs, and their destiny. The Nile River was the key to ancient Egypt's agricultural success. Every year, the Nile would flood. This flood was predictable and beneficial. The floodwaters would deposit a layer of rich black silt onto the land. This silt was incredibly fertile. It allowed the Egyptians to grow a wide variety of crops. These crops were essential to the Egyptian diet. They grew wheat, barley, and flax. They also grew vegetables like onions, leeks, and garlic. The Nile provided the water to irrigate these crops. The Egyptians developed sophisticated irrigation systems. These systems helped them to control the flow of water to their fields. The abundance of food led to a surplus. This surplus allowed the Egyptians to support a large population. It also allowed them to specialize in different trades and crafts. The Nile River was a liquid highway. It flowed from south to north. This made it easy for boats to travel downstream with the current. To travel upstream, the Egyptians used sails. They also used oars to propel their boats against the current. The Nile connected the different parts of Egypt. It allowed for the transportation of goods and people. Farmers could transport their surplus crops to markets in the cities. Traders could bring luxury goods from distant lands. The Nile also facilitated trade with other civilizations. The Egyptians traded with Nubia to the south. They traded for gold, ivory, and exotic animals. They traded with the Levant to the east for cedar wood and olive oil. This trade brought wealth and new ideas to Egypt. In the beginning, Egypt was not one unified kingdom. It was a collection of small, independent villages. These villages were scattered along the banks of the Nile. The Nile acted as a unifying force. The need to control the floodwaters of the Nile encouraged cooperation between these villages. They built irrigation canals and dams together. This cooperation led to the formation of larger political units. These units eventually merged to form two kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Around 3100 BC, a king named Menes unified Upper and Lower Egypt. He established the first dynasty of ancient Egypt. The Nile played a crucial role in this unification. It provided a natural communication route. It also provided a shared source of life and prosperity. Section 5, Engineering Marvels, Taming the River, Building an Empire. The ancient Egyptians were master engineers. They harnessed the power of the Nile to create impressive irrigation systems. These systems included canals, dams, and reservoirs. These structures allowed them to control the flow of water. They could direct water to their fields and store it for times of drought. The Nile also provided the building blocks for their monumental architecture. The Egyptians quarried limestone and sandstone from the cliffs along the riverbanks. They used these materials to build temples, pyramids, and other structures. They transported these massive stones using boats on the Nile. Section 6. The Power of the Pharaohs, Divine Authority and the Nile. The pharaoh was the absolute ruler of ancient Egypt. He was considered to be a god king. The pharaoh's power was closely tied to the Nile. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh controlled the floods of the Nile. A good flood meant a prosperous year. A bad flood meant famine and hardship. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining Ma'at. Ma'at was the Egyptian concept of order, truth, and justice. The pharaoh ensured the proper functioning of society. He oversaw the construction of temples and pyramids. He also led the Egyptian army in battle. Section 7. Life and death on the Nile. Culture, religion, and the afterlife. The Nile permeated every aspect of ancient Egyptian culture and religion. The Egyptians believed that the Nile was a sacred river. It was the source of all life. They worshipped the Nile god Hapi. Hapi was depicted as a benevolent figure with a large belly and pendulous breasts, symbolizing fertility and abundance. The Egyptians also believed in an afterlife. They believed that the Nile played a role in the journey to the afterlife. They buried their dead in tombs located in the desert west of the Nile. They believed that the Nile would carry the souls of the deceased to the afterlife. Section 8. Conclusion. The enduring legacy of the Nile. The Nile River was the lifeblood of ancient Egypt. It provided the foundation for one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. The Nile's annual floods brought fertile silt that allowed for abundant agriculture. It served as a vital transportation route, facilitating trade and communication. The Nile shaped Egyptian culture, religion, and engineering. It inspired the construction of monumental architecture and complex irrigation systems. The ancient Egyptians recognized the importance of the Nile. They revered it as a god. They depended on it for their survival. The legacy of the Nile lives on in the ruins of ancient Egypt. It stands as a testament to the power of nature to shape human civilization.